I mentioned it to a friend and he said, oh yeah, I know someone with an HRG. And this is how it often works in the museum. The friend phones me up and says I can have it for a year to put in my exhibition. And so it's there, it's great, I really love it. It's the original kit car. It's got a 1938 engine, 1939 chassis and a body built in the 60s. One of the other areas I felt that I needed to look at was what you might think of as bank managers' cars, upper middle class motoring. And I knew that there were a lot of British manufacturers, small manufacturers like Rover, Humber, Armstrong Siddeley, that were particularly marketing in that area. And so I wanted to look at the cars they were providing. And I got a really nice Rover for that, which I thought was the epitome of post-war middle-class motoring. The fourth area I wanted to look at was your average, everyday, normal car on the road. The sort of car that everybody could experience, that your dad or my dad might buy. And so I had a look around and I was overwhelmed by the number that were available, and decided that rather than go with an Austin or a Morris, which I was offered several of, I would actually like to look at what Ford were doing in Britain and in Australia at that time. So I have a couple of Fords from different periods. One from the immediate post-war period, which is actually a pre-war car that's been slightly redesigned, and one from much later, a Ford Cortina Consul, which shows the way that the Americans are starting to influence British motoring and then Australian motoring immediately post-war. Of course, these cars are not simply available in Australia. They are representative of the British Empire as a whole. These are vehicles that would be seen in India, in Singapore. I lived in Singapore for 3 years and I remember seeing many of these cars on the roads there. If you go to New Zealand, up until the 1970s, a lot of these cars were in use daily in New Zealand. Wherever the British were, until the late 1950s and the early 1960s, then their cars ruled the road. Here at Birdwood, we try to tell the story of Australian motoring as a whole. And it's a huge story. It's 100 years, 100 years of cars that have shaped the world that we live in today. There are thousands of manufacturers, thousands that have imported into Australia. So we have to have changing exhibitions. And we can't tell the whole story in one go. So what we do is we change the exhibitions around every year to tell a little niche story. And that's what this exhibition is. It's a little element of the whole story.
Coming up after the break, a husband and wife team rescue an outback pub from closing and become local heroes.